Imagine this heart-stopping moment. You awaken in the pitch-black depths of night, your pulse racing wildly, pulled from sleep by an eerie, labored breathing right outside your window. A sound that's too close, too primal, sending icy fingers of dread crawling down your spine. With a knot of terror twisting in your gut, you hesitantly draw back the curtain, only to be met by a face that's hauntingly familiar yet grotesquely twisted. Almost human, but distorted beyond recognition, unnaturally broad and shrouded in thick, unkempt hair, with eyes that are bottomless pits, reflecting nothing but an all-consuming, desperate hunger that pierces your soul. This isn't a figment of a fevered dream or a tale spun around a flickering campfire to scare the young. This was the soul-shattering reality that gripped the residents of the remote settlement of Yasnaya Polyana in Russia's Kostroma region during the bleak, unforgiving autumn of 1990. It all began with the gut-wrenching vanishing of 8-year-old Katia Kalugina, a bright-eyed girl full of innocent wonder, who simply stepped beyond her family's gate one evening and was swallowed by the shadows, leaving her loved ones in a vortex of anguish and the entire village enveloped in a suffocating fog of fear and uncertainty. Soon after, the assaults erupted, savage, inexplicable ambushes by what terrified witnesses could only describe as a hybrid abomination, part man and part bear, gliding through the darkness with an unnatural silence that belied its massive form, striking with a devastating power that crushed bones and tore flesh like a force of nature unleashed in rage. The local authorities, overwhelmed and grasping at straws, initially suspected a deranged human predator stalking the woods, but the clues scattered like autumn leaves pointed to something far more feral, more otherworldly. The village's seasoned forester insisted that a monstrous being lurked in the forest depths, and in his brave but doomed pursuit to unmask it, he too fell victim to its wrath, his cries echoing the collective despair of a community on the brink. Yet, when determined investigator Artyom Valinsky plunged into the investigation, driven by a burning sense of justice and empathy for the broken families, he uncovered a long-buried secret that twisted the knife of tragedy even deeper. Every single victim was linked by one concealed shame, hidden away for 2 agonizing decades. This is a story of how the ghosts of our past can rise up in the most literal, blood-soaked form, and how certain wrongs are so profound, so soul-destroying, that no amount of prayer or regret can ever wash them clean. They demand retribution in the cruelest ways imaginable. On a crisp, wind-swept October evening in 1990, when the leaves whispered secrets of impending winter and the air carried a chill that seeped into bones, the peaceful hamlet of Yasnaya Polyana, a cluster of weathered wooden houses nestled amid vast, brooding forests where generations had lived in quiet harmony with nature, was shattered by an incident that revived horrors dormant for 50 long years. Little Katia Kalugina, with her cherubic face framed by golden braids and eyes sparkling with the pure joy of childhood, turned to her mother with a hopeful plea. "Mama, can I run to the mailbox by the gate? We're expecting Grandma's letter from the big city, and I want to be the first to see it." Her mother, Nina, immersed in the rhythmic slicing of fresh bread for the family supper, the warm aroma filling their modest kitchen like a comforting embrace, nodded distractedly, her thoughts tangled in the evening's chores, not bothering to glance out the fogged window to watch her daughter's innocent errand. The gate stood a scant 15 meters from the welcoming porch, a familiar path trodden countless times, one that should have taken no more than a fleeting minute under the dimming twilight sky, where the first stars began to pierce the veil like distant hopes. But when Nina, a sudden premonition gripping her heart like a vice, stepped out onto the creaking porch just 3 minutes later, her calls for Katia echoing into the gathering dusk, the girl was nowhere to be found. Not lingering by the gate with its rusted latch, not skipping along the rutted dirt road that wound through the village, not peeking curiously over the neighbor's weathered fence where wildflowers clung stubbornly to life. Only the mailbox door swung idly in the brisk wind, its metallic creak a mournful lament, and an unnatural hush blanketed the scene, thick and oppressive, as if the very air held its breath in anticipation of a storm not of weather, but of sorrow. Panic spread like wildfire through the close-knit community, igniting a frenzy of desperate action. By midnight, every soul in Yasnaya Polyana was roused. Strong-backed men, their faces grim under the flickering beams of lanterns, combed through tangled gardens overgrown with weeds, dilapidated sheds leaning like weary elders, and the ominous fringes beyond the village where the forest loomed like a living entity, its branches reaching out like grasping fingers. Women, their voices trembling with barely contained hysteria, frantically dialed relatives on crackling phone lines, interrogated wide-eyed children who clung to their skirts in fear, and scoured every dank cellar and dusty attic, their hearts pounding with the terror of what might or might not be found. The search persisted through the long, exhausting hours until dawn's pale light crept over the horizon, casting long shadows that mirrored the villagers' growing despair. But Katia had vanished as completely as a whisper in the wind, leaving no footprint, no scrap of clothing, no clue to fuel the flickering ember of hope. The absence gnawed at them all, a void that amplified every creak of floorboards, every rustle in the underbrush, turning the once familiar hamlet into a place of shadows and unspoken dread, where parents held their little ones closer, whispering prayers against the unknown. 9 torturous days dragged on, each one a relentless assault on the community's spirit, filled with sleepless nights of imagining the worst. Katia lost, cold, crying out for her mother in the vast, unforgiving wilderness, and hope eroded into a brittle shell, cracked by the weight of uncertainty. Then, a band of seasoned hunters, driven by a mix of duty and the raw ache of paternal protectiveness, ventured deeper into the forest than most dared, navigating past the treacherous mires where fog swirled like restless spirits and the ground sucked at boots with greedy insistence. What they discovered amid the sodden moss beneath a towering, ancient pine tree shattered their resolve and plunged them into an abyss of horror. Scattered like discarded rags were fragments of a child's garments. A small jacket ripped to tatters as if by savage claws, pants with legs torn away in violent fury, all drenched in congealed blood that mingled grotesquely with the earth's mud and scattered pine needles, the sight evoking a visceral wave of nausea and grief that brought hardened men to their knees. Summoned in a haze of renewed agony, Katia's parents arrived, their faces ashen masks of denial, and identified the clothes in an instant, the familiar patterns, the mended seams done by Nina's own hands, triggering a wail of anguish that echoed through the trees like a soul being torn asunder. Yet, the child's body was absent. No skeletal remains picked clean by scavengers. No strands of golden hair caught on branches. Nothing to offer closure or a grave to mourn over. Instead, the hunters uncovered something even more unsettling. A colossal imprint in the moist soil, the clear outline of a bare human foot, but grotesquely enlarged, as if stamped by a giant from the darkest folktales whispered by elders on winter nights. The foot was disproportionately wide, toes splayed in a feral manner, untouched by the confines of shoes, evoking images of a being raised wild, untamed by society. No evidence of a fight disturbed the scene. No scuffed earth from desperate struggles, no trails of dragged limbs. Only this chilling artifact and the forest's oppressive stillness, punctuated by the mournful cry of a distant bird, as if the woods themselves guarded a secret too terrible to reveal. The enigma of Katia's fate loomed over Yasnaya Pollyanna like a malevolent cloud, poisoning daily life with suspicion, grief, and an undercurrent of blame. Whispers wondering if Nina had been too careless, if the village had angered some ancient force. The district police, burdened by the weight of unsolved mysteries in such remote outposts, initiated a formal criminal probe, officers trudging through muddied paths with notebooks in hand. But within a mere week, the inquiry stalled in frustrating limbo. No tangible evidence, no eyewitness accounts, hypotheses collapsing under scrutiny like houses of cards in a gale. It was amid this impasse that Zahar Drozdov, the hamlet's reclusive forester, a weathered man in his mid-30s, with sun-leathered skin and eyes that held the wisdom and weariness of countless solitary treks through the taiga, entered the station, his presence commanding despite his quiet demeanor. Known locally as a taciturn loner who communed more with trees than people, yet revered for his uncanny understanding of the forest's moods and the habits of its inhabitants, Drozdov spoke with an intensity that cut through the room's stale air. His voice a gravelly whisper laced with urgency and a hint of fear he couldn't fully mask. He described anomalies in the surrounding woodlands that sent shivers down spines. A predator unlike any other, savagely dispatching large prey, stray dogs found eviscerated, calves with necks snapped like twigs, even a juvenile moose torn asunder with a brutality that evoked images of a frenzied bear in the throes of madness. But bears had been absent from these parts for a decade, eradicated by overhunting and shrinking habitats. Their absence, a point of local pride, now turned to dread. Drozdov recounted, his hands gesturing animatedly, of massive tracks imprinted in the soil, nocturnal bellows that pierced the silence like cries from the damned, sounds that were neither fully animal nor human, but a haunting blend that stirred primal instincts. He insisted this being was sentient, sly, and lethally perilous, its actions calculated rather than instinctive, but the detectives merely exchanged knowing glances, dismissing him as an eccentric steeped in folklore, a man whose isolation had blurred the line between reality and myth. They dutifully noted his testimony, filed it in a drawer with other odd reports, and sent him on his way, attributing his fervor to the imaginings of someone too immersed in the wild's mysteries. Scarcely a week had passed since the soul-crushing unearthing of Kadia's bloodied remnants, a discovery that had cast a pall of mourning over the village, with candles flickering in windows as silent vigils and mothers weeping in hushed groups, when Yasnaya Polyana was plunged into fresh terror that amplified the collective nightmare to unbearable levels. On the twilight of October 23rd, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and the forest enveloped in a cloak of deepening gloom, piercing screams rent the evening calm from the homes lining the central thoroughfare, a raw, guttural wail that clawed at the soul, evoking images of unimaginable suffering. Villagers burst from their doors, lanterns swinging wildly in hands, pitchforks and axes gripped with white-knuckled fear, anticipating a violent altercation or a feral dog pack on the rampage. What confronted them instead froze their blood in veins. Zahar Drozdov lurching along the rutted path, clinging to a fence for support as if it were his last lifeline. His countenance a harrowing tapestry of pain and abject horror, blood drenching his attire in ominous, expanding stains that gleamed wetly under the lantern light. His right arm hung uselessly at his side, hastily bandaged with strips from his shredded jacket, through which dark crimson oozed relentlessly, a testament to grievous injury. The skin on his forearm was lacerated in jagged strips, muscles laid bare in gruesome display, profound gashes on his wrist pulsing with each labored breath. Neighbors surged toward him in a tide of empathy and alarm, some sprinting to summon medical help via the village's sole phone line, others pressing makeshift compresses to stem the hemorrhage, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of concern. Early conjectures leaned toward a workplace mishap. Drozdov often wielded sharp implements in his forestry duties, but upon the arrival of paramedics, who examined him under the harsh glare of flashlights amid the gathering crowd, the truth unveiled a more sinister narrative. These lacerations stemmed from an overwhelming force, inflicted by claws or fangs surpassing even a bear's might, conjuring visions of a primordial monster risen from ancient depths to wreak havoc on the innocent. The following day, in the sterile confines of the district hospital ward, where the sharp scent of disinfectants warred with the coppery odor of blood and machines beeped in monotonous rhythm, investigator Artyom Valinsky, a resolute detective with a chiseled features hardened by years of confronting humanity's darkest deeds, yet eyes that betrayed a deep-seated compassion for the vulnerable, visited the bandaged Drozdov. The forester, his complexion ashen against the white sheets, his voice a ragged whisper frayed by agony and medication, wove a narrative that straddled the boundary between tangible horror and supernatural dread. He had been pursuing the entity through the tangled undergrowth, guided by fresh imprints and snapped twigs that spoke of recent passage, when it ambushed him from the obscurity. A colossal silhouette, blending human contours with beastly ferocity, cloaked in tangled fur, eyes ablaze with a feral, tormented fury that pierced the heart. It pounced with otherworldly velocity, its talons rending flesh in searing agony, its power overwhelming like a tidal wave crashing upon fragile shores. Drozdov recounted his desperate defense with his hunting blade, managing to inflict a wound that elicited a howl of pain before he fled, bloodied and broken, his spirit fractured by the encounter's brutality. Valinsky absorbed every word, his pen flying across pages, intuition whispering that this was no isolated incident, but a thread in a tapestry of interconnected tragedies linked to Kadia's fate, an enigma demanding resolution to restore peace to tormented souls. As news rippled through the hamlet, paranoia took root like invasive weeds. Doors barricaded at dusk's approach, youngsters confined indoors with tearful pleas, tales of nocturnal disturbances circulating in hushed tones around stoves, the atmosphere heavy with a fear that gnawed at sanity's edges, transforming neighbors into suspects and the familiar forest into a realm of nightmares. The onslaught continued, each attack a fresh wound on the community's collective psyche, deepening the abyss of despair. One misty evening, a sturdy farmer named Ivan Petrov, beloved for his booming laugh and hands roughened by decades of coaxing life from stubborn soil, was assaulted while tending his barn animals, the structure's wooden beams groaning under the assault as the creature exploded through the door, splintering wood like brittle bones. Its bellow reverberated like thunder from hell's depths, shaking the foundations and Ivan's resolve. He battled fiercely, wielding a pitchfork with swings born of desperation, but the monster subdued him, its claws gouging deep into his shoulder, bones fracturing with sickening snaps that echoed his screams. He clung to life, dragging himself to his doorstep where his wife discovered him, crumpled and bleeding, his gaze distant with shock as he murmured through gritted teeth. It looked like a man, but twisted, eyes full of such hatred, such starving need. The depiction aligned chillingly with Drozdov's, a towering humanoid shrouded in hair, agile beyond belief, assaulting with a primal wrath that evoked pity for whatever torment had birthed such a being. Valinsky, now wholly consumed by the case, conversed with survivors, their accounts quivering with relived trauma, visages drained as they depicted the entity's semi-human visage contorted in monstrosity, stirring a complex brew of revulsion and sorrow for a creature perhaps more victim than villain. The detective's own heart weighed heavy with empathy for these humble folk, ensnared in a vortex of horror they never deserved, their once simple lives fractured by an enigma that begged for unraveling. As the assaults escalated, another resident mauled during a firewood forage, left with scars that marred body and soul alike, his nights forever plagued by flashbacks. The law enforcement bolstered efforts, deploying armed sentinels to patrol the perimeters, but the entity evaded capture like mist through fingers, striking unpredictably and retreating into obscurity, leaving trails of blood and broken spirits. Drozdov, recuperating amid hospital walls, confided in Valinsky a profound intuition. This was no mere beast, but a manifestation rooted in the village's shadowed history, a sin long interred now resurfacing with vengeful claws. Compelled by a drive for truth that burned like a flame in his chest, Valinsky delved into archival depths. His evenings blurred in dimly lit basements amid musty documents, the solitary bulb swinging overhead casting elongated shadows that danced like specters of the past he exhumed. He unraveled a harrowing connection, all afflicted tied to Roman and Nina Kalugin, Katya's guardians. 2 decades prior, in 1970, they had borne a son, Dmitri, afflicted with grievous malformations. Body enveloped in fur-like hair, features warped in a manner that evoked horror in the young couple. Overwhelmed by terror and societal scorn, they abandoned the babe in the wilderness, consigning him to perish, their remorse entombed in silence, unspoken even in whispers. Yet Dmitri endured, nurtured by the forest's harsh embrace, his physique mutating in grotesque adaptation, his psyche distorted by rejection's venom into a conduit of retribution, his every action a cry of anguish from a forsaken child. The disclosure struck Valinsky like lightning, his spirit burdened by the tragedy. A progeny discarded, morphed into monstrosity by neglect's cruelty, now reclaiming acknowledgement through carnage. Drozdov, revealed as Dmitri's junior sibling born unmarred years later, had unearthed his brother's survival and endeavored to shield him, providing sustenance in secrecy, his heart torn between fraternal devotion and the dread of Dmitri's transformation. The onslaughts were deliberate. Katya, the adopted offspring embodying substitution. Nina, the matriarch who decreed his doom. Roman, the patriarch whose apathy sentenced him. Dmitri's twilight vigils, scratching at pains, peering through glass with eyes brimming with yearning, were pleas for validation, a frantic assertion from an essence ensnared betwixt humanity and savagery. Drozdov's injury stemmed from tragic misrecognition in gloom, kin assailing kin in obscured fury. Realizing Dmitri's uncontrollability, Drozdov resolved to terminate the cycle, prowling the woods with sorrow-laden resolve, his essence aching with fratricide's onus. Valinsky, compassion clashing with obligation, orchestrated a conclusive pursuit, veteran trackers and lawmen encircling a forsaken shack deep in the woodland under starless heavens. Storming inward, they confronted the abomination. A behemoth frame, fur-cloaked, countenance a mangled human effigy, orbs aflame with torment. The melee was ferocious. Dmitri flinging assailants like discarded puppets, bellows blending with weeps, projectiles piercing flesh until he crumpled, crimson pooling, his waning gaze upon Valinsky one of immense woe, a mute entreaty for comprehension. He expired in the clinic, grasping a tattered photo shard, his anguished existence concluding in hushed torment. Drozdov, detained as a bettor, was institutionalized, his reticence unbroken until self-inflicted demise, departing a etched missive. I merely desired their recollection of whom they obliterated. Roman descended into inebriation, perishing solitary from hepatic failure. His abode eschewed as accursed, murmurs of infantile tones resounding nocturnally. Valinsky relocated, yet visions of the entity's imploring gaze plagued him, a memento of humankind's aptitude for barbarity. This narrative, murmured in Kostromaz's Hamlets, constitutes a visceral odyssey of repudiation's ramifications, a juvenile's agony materializing as dread, obscuring boundaries twixt mortal and brute, its concerning lesions festering across eras, transgressions demanding reckoning. What deem you? Might Dmitri and Zahar merit absolution, or constituted their vendetta unmitigated malevolence? Impart below, your perspectives resonate.